voters. I can't get over how difficult it's been to get change. Our elected officials didn't adopt changes. It happened because of people being in the streets one way or the other. They didn't decide to give us the vote, because it was all men then at that time. They didn't decide to give the youth the right to vote at 18 till they were in Vietnam, serving in the war, and were angry when they were coming back that they couldn't vote. So we can't count on our elected officials to be magnanimous. They never have been. So this is a struggle, and we need to be aware of that today. To me, the most amazing thing in some of the movies and some of the recollections is the relationship these two built to make things happen. If it wasn't for President Johnson and Martin Luther King Jr.'s relationship, I'm not sure what it would have happened if we'd still be marching. But somehow they got the Voting Rights Act passed. And that happened later in the summer in 1965. And it's had monumental results, starting immediately because they started working in states in the South especially. But as you can see, we had counties here in Michigan that were under court orders to make sure that they were being properly, and the Voting Rights Act was being properly enforced. But we were lucky to have this, and it has made a difference in lawsuits and in what resulted in the South. You can see Section 5 that we're going to talk about again in a minute allowed for a lot of court actions to take place. This is the enforcement section. And you can see in Mississippi it was used 112 times. So it did have an impact. And so now we're back into this continual cycle of voter suppression. And some of the restrictions are, for example, we now have 34 states that require a photo ID. And a lot of you are used to it. We're here in Michigan, we've had it a long time. It's not easy for everyone to have a photo ID. I was just reading a story last night of a woman losing her giving up her driver's license, and wasn't sure how she meets the requirement without that, to have a photo ID. We've had redistricting that we've all talked about that's made a difference, and reduction of early voting times have occurred. For the 2016 presidential election, 17 states had more restrictive voting laws than the last presidential election. And remember, the turnout was down, 40% at least of registered voters didn't vote in 2016. Since 2010, 20 states have new restrictions for more restrictive voter ID. 7 have made it harder to register. 6 cut back on early voting days, which we really don't have in Michigan, but in some places you can go vote for 10 days prior to the election. You're actually voting. You're not doing an absentee ballot. You're actually using the machine. 3 made it harder to restore voting rights for people with past criminal records that Joan talked about, those that have been fulfilled their time after committing a felony. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there was a U.S. Supreme Court in 2013, Shelby versus Holder, which resulted in gutting the Voting Rights Act because it took out the enforcement provision, Section 5, that we were just talking about, used in those 100 cases in the South. This was a very conscious effort by a group of conservatives in the United States. Our Supreme Court Justice was involved in this decision to get rid of that enforcement section for probably over 20 years, and then had the opportunity with the Supreme Court and having the majority to overturn this enforcement section, which means those 2 counties in Michigan no longer have to get pre-approval, and let alone all those places in the South and other places around the country. Congressman John Lewis noted, "I'm shocked, dismayed, disappointed. I take it personally. These men never stood in unmovable lines." They were never denied the right to participate in the democratic process. They were never beaten, jailed, run off their farms, or fired from their jobs. No one they knew died simply trying to register to vote. They are not the victims of gerrymandering or contemporary unjust schemes to maneuver them out of their constitutional rights. And as you all know, Congressman John Lewis still serves and is one of those pioneers that went across the bridge as a young man that was beaten. This is the Supreme Court saying, "Comfy, you'll be happy to know," this is the Voting Rights Act being buried, "Comfy, you'll be happy to know Congress is coming to your rescue." As we all know, that's not happening anytime soon. The Voting Rights Act had provision in it to be reauthorized every so often. It had been reauthorized for under many presidents, Republican and Democrat, as well as Republican and Democratic Congress people that were serving. But the change was dramatic in 2013, and I think we're going to see more repercussions of not having this act again. We may have to go back to Selma or new places. So there have been voter suppression legal challenges. The ACLU continues the fight. You can see the list of states, but again, there's nothing much happening with these yet. And now we have a new event occurring because President Trump claimed there was massive voter fraud in the last election. He asserted he actually lost the popular vote because of this, and he called for a major investigation. It's not just him that believes this. I mean, there are a lot of people in the country that actually believe this. And on May 11th, President Trump created the Election Integrity Commission, and Chris Kobach, I believe is how you pronounce it, from Kansas, is one of the vice chairs along with Vice President Pence. They've had a couple of meetings. They have staff. They're looking at, I don't know what they're going to recommend. We don't have anything yet written. The League of Women Voters is nationally, has some information on their website if you want more about it. The League is very concerned about what might come out. They figure one of the things that's likely to come from this is more purging of their voting rolls prior to election, which we know had an impact in the last election. We're just not sure. There's a lot of monitoring, and you may get an action alert from national that would be to every member, and you can share with others to take action if and when this commission issues their report. It's something we're watching. So now I'm going to change to the state level. We have quite a unique system here in Michigan because of townships, really, local government. Michigan, I'm not from Michigan originally, but I've learned that local control is just so important to everyone in Michigan. So as a result, you can see we have a very decentralized system. We have 83 county clerks, 280 city clerks, 1,240 township clerks, and 256 villages that have clerks. Now, some of you might know, in a village, they don't have an office. They're not going to be open certain hours. You might go to somebody's home. That's not unusual. Each one of these really have their own system. So depending on where you live, there can be quite a bit of difference between registering in downtown Lansing or registering in a village up in the UP. We have over 4,800 precincts statewide of all sizes, because none of those people are going to give up their precinct. Even if they're in a village and they have one precinct, they're going to keep that. We have a new qualified voter file to manage data that's electronic. I don't know, up here, are you using the electronic poll book?
Yeah.
Yeah, we are too in Lansing, in East Lansing where I live. It's been kind of interesting because I got trained to use it after I had been trained to be a worker at the polling place. So it was additional training, but we only allow one computer in our polling place. Is that true here?
Yes.
One. So you can imagine the lines that result in that. And our computers are put in a closet after that election till the next election. They can't be used for anything else. Now you stop and think about that. I can get a college degree online. I can do my banking online, but somehow the qualified voter, laptop has to be locked up for 2 years and only one per precinct. So, I think there's maybe better ways. Some clerks have hours, some extended, some don't. Absentee voting, and I don't have yet 2016 figures, but it was at an all-time high in 2014, and you can imagine why. Lines are getting longer, takes more time. Frankly, a lot of us aren't honest on one of those criteria to meet absentee ballots, or we might be out of town and sure enough we're at home. But so we are doing that. Michigan is known for our extremely lengthy ballot. And as some of you know, that's how we determine how many Democrats voted and how many Republicans, because they're likely to do a straight party ticket. Most people don't go all the way through, and so we look at the Board of Regents for the different universities and come up with the percentages. We are known nationwide for our long voting time, and I don't have current numbers. This was from 2012. We were at 21.9 minutes. That was fast in East Lansing. We do have new voting machines being phased in. It depends on your clerk what those machines are. Each clerk had an option, I believe, of 3. And the state used some of the federal money to purchase these different systems. So we also have a lot of laws governing elections here in Michigan, and you have a handout that we've prepared, and every time I've used it, people have wanted to add things to it, so it's growing. But you have to reside in Michigan 30 days before you can register, and you have to register 30 days prior to election. So you got to be here 2 months to register. You have to re-register if you move within the state. A lot of the states allow your registration to move with you. Now think about that. It's already on a centralized system, so how easy would that be? But we don't. That would require a law. You have to show a photo ID or sign an affidavit when you vote. You can get an absentee ballot if you meet if you meet the criteria. You have to sign a form affirming you're a citizen. I'm not sure all of you know about that, but I'll show you that in a minute. You have to vote in person the first time if you registered by mail or if you were registered by somebody else other than the clerk or their representative in their office. So if you registered with me as a league member, because I'm not deputized, you cannot vote in absentee that first election, which happens with a lot of college students. Right now, we have a law in the books that's going through the courts. There was an injunction in the presidential election, but we have passed a law banning straight party ticket. So we don't know what will happen in the next election in 2018 on that issue. It's still in the courts. You have to have your address and your registration, your address on your driver's license and your registration match. This was done to deal with students, primarily in East Lansing. And we do allow ex-felons to vote once they have paid their restitution. This is the form for application, and I think it's really important to note that everybody sees this, that you're under penalty. You know, this is a legal document that you fill out, so it's important to think about that when we look at all these things that are going to come out about fraud and protecting us. But our registration form is pretty simple, but there are penalties. And then at the last election, they weren't too happy with me, but I walked off with one of these sheets that maybe yours looks like this, maybe not. It's blue and white, and it's a half sheet, and you turn it over. You have to fill this out when you go in to vote, and I don't know about you, but I can never remember if I wrote Judith Ann or Judith A. I do know my address and birthday. And but you fill this out, and on this is the new wording that was added by a law passed a few years ago that the League opposed. I certify that I am a United States citizen and a registered qualified elector in this precinct, and hereby make application to vote at this election. So this is the new requirement to verify that you are a citizen. They tried to do something else that was more cumbersome. The governor vetoed it. This was the compromise. So think about that too when the stuff comes out about the need to protect our elections from fraud. And I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't know about the other side. It actually says, this is an affidavit for a voter who doesn't have their picture ID with you. And I learned when I was working at the polls, and probably this is true only in East Lansing, but maybe Ann Arbor too, some people purposely come into the polls without their ID to test this system. And you are allowed to vote if you turn this form over and you sign this. But there's something else you're allowed that I've learned more and more people don't know about, and that's a provisional ballot. Have any of you ever used a provisional ballot? Have you heard about it? Okay, so the provisional ballot, this is a copy of it, is pretty important. If you get to the polls and you go through that poll book process, and it doesn't show you as a registered voter, you can ask for a provisional ballot. And each of the precincts is supposed to have this form. And then it's up to you. Again, there's penalties if you violate. It's all there. So think about that when the fraud stuff comes up. But you have to then go to the clerk's office within a certain time period and show that you are registered and work this out. But you also have to do it at the precinct you think you are registered at. You can't go to just any precinct. It was interesting in the presidential election, and it was kind of scary to me, but we had been along a long time. Somebody in front of me, a woman, was told she wasn't in the poll book, and they told her to go to City Hall, which from my area wouldn't have been an easy trip. You wouldn't walk, and parking's never easy. And then, after me, a woman was told the same thing. And I knew about provisional ballots, and I knew they had the same training I had had, but I couldn't say anything in line because you really can't do that. So afterwards, after I voted, I went over to a poll worker that I sort of knew at the polling place and asked if I'd talk to him, and we kind of had an argument about it, and he went outside with me eventually, and I said, "You're not offering people provisional ballots." He didn't know what I was talking about. So I went home, I went out to my car, I called the local league president, who I knew was at home in case there were things happening, and she called the clerk, and the clerk went over to work with this precinct. We have to be vigilant. I mean, this is a law, but look at those 1,800 local precincts, all being run by well-meaning people. I mean, you know, and they've had training. The clerk had to physically go there to get them to use provisional ballots. I guarantee those 2 women didn't show up at City Hall. I don't know if they were registered or not. But it's something you should be aware of and make sure other people are aware of. So voter turnout, I think this has got to become a league issue that we haven't really thought much about. We've been working on voter registration and we'll continue to work on voter registration. But voter turnout is awful. And I don't think I have to worry about you guys voting, but there are people in your community that are not voting for some reason. And we don't really know the answer to this. There's some polling, I'm sure, going on. We'll learn more about it. But look at our numbers in Michigan. 65.7% of registered voters didn't vote. I mean, according to the records from the Secretary of State, we're very high on the number of people that are registered. Some other organizations that count this in Michigan don't have us as high as the Secretary of State. I can't explain that difference. But the most common reasons voters cite for not voting are the lack of competition and meaningful choices on the ballot. But that's kind of up to us. If we're not running for office or recruiting people we want to run, we need to be responsible for that. And then, of course, problems with voter registration or getting to the polls that day. We don't make voting as convenient as we could. So I think it's something the league can think about, maybe partnering with others in communities to see what we could do on voter turnout. There are some issues like Joan talked about in these postcards that talked about that the National League and local leagues throughout the United States are working on. One of them is online voter registration, which just means what it says. You go online, you register to vote. 31 states already do this, and the District of Columbia. They're not having a problem. Nobody's yelling fraud. It's something we could do here in Michigan. The Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson, seems to be in favor of it. However, the majority party in the House and Michigan Senate are not in favor of it. We have had bills now introduced by Republicans in the Michigan Senate that would do this. And the league's gonna try to work on the next few weeks to get a hearing on these bills, and you'll be hearing more about that. One of them is sponsored by a senator from the Traverse City area, right, Joan? Senator Schmidt. Obviously, it would increase the number of people that were able to register. It can save money. It could increase accuracy, and obviously there's less staff time involved. And then one of the other things is to expand early voting. 37 states have that. But there is also some states, Oregon, Colorado, and Washington, that actually have mail-in ballots. And you can actually mail it in. They have special places where you can do that, leave them in a drop box or at City Hall, City Hall or whatever. But they also, if you really wanted to go vote, they set up polling places too. So it's more alternatives. Michigan doesn't have early voting. The closest thing we have, and I really hadn't paid attention to this until the clerk in Lansing was at one of our presentations, told me about this. The Saturday before the election, the clerks are required by law to open up for absentee ballots. And I believe he told me it was from 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock. But it's something to check out to see if that's happening in your community. That's our only assistance. So we want to expand early voting, and obviously Michigan could do a lot on that. We also could deal with same-day registration. some states allow you to I told you it'd be 60 days if you moved here, and then 30 days, lived here. 13 states allow you to register that day. I think that'd be a really dramatic change for Michigan, and I don't see it happening, but it's a possibility. And then automatic voting registration has just taken off in the last couple of years. We have 10 states that are doing this. When you get a driver's license, instead of being asked, you're automatically registered. That's not happening here. You can decline. It's like some other things. What's that called? There's a term. Sorry.
Opt out.
Yeah, opt out. Excuse me, let me grab a drink. Joan, you want to come up and we can help with this together? I'm going to let you talk because I need a drink.
Yes, it's just going
You have to refill your lovely or use that.
Judy joined us today. She's been on antibiotics for about 5 days, so we're happy to have her, but she's losing her voice here. Suzanne asked me as I was walking past the postcards, apropos of what Judy was just saying about the kinds of bills that are going to be introduced that we're making a push on in the next few days. These postcards are about that effort, and we'd encourage all of you to sign a postcard and address it on the back to our state senator and our state representative.
They're on the table over here.
Yep. Do you want to continue?
Yep,
Can
go
you?
ahead. Where'd that go? Did I walk off with it?
Or did you need this?
So the action we need is for you to start contacting your elected officials. We need to build support. And you've got the cards. I think Joan's already addressed them. And then,
No.
They're not addressed.
oh, okay.
The addresses are here on the wall.
It's right here too. They're all the same. So if you know their name, the Senate and the House. Again, you're probably going to see some alerts from us. We're part of a mini campaign with the ACLU to try to build support by December 15th when they leave, to have a hearing, not passage, just a hearing in the Senate on some of these reforms. So, in summary, to me, the vote is the greatest equalizer I know in our country. My vote counts as much as your vote, as anybody with money, as anybody with no money. But if we're not all able to vote, it's not much of an equalizer. The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice, according to President Lyndon Johnson when he signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So I think we have to all remember, as easy as we think it is for us to vote, and we may have been voting a lot of years, it's not easy for everyone. And it's not as an automatic event as we would like it to have to participate in our democracy. So we're going to see more about this from the League and other groups in the coming months. And I hope this background helps prepare you for the importance of working on this and not to think we already have all the laws we need. And especially to respond, I think, to what's going to come out of this election commission at the federal level. Any questions? Joan and I are glad to talk, and Joan, you wanted to?
Yep. Questions?
That's not so much a question, but yeah, can you talk about the gerrymandering petitions that are we're
Yep.
finding everywhere?
Yeah, we can.
Gerrymandering petitions.
The Voters Not Politicians and the League of Women Voters and ACLU and NAACP, we had, I can't tell you how many meetings and how many hours I spent at them since about last, I think I met Katie in December of last year. And We tried to negotiate a memorandum of understanding to have one umbrella organization with all of these groups, 4 groups.